Today's presenter is Lucidworks CTO and co-founder and Solr committer, Grant Ingersoll. Thanks for joining us today, Grant.
Thanks, Aaliyah, and thanks everyone for joining me. Hope to present an exciting hour here of some of the great new features we've been working on with Lucidworks Fusion 3. And the way I thought I would start off is by doing a demo. And so let me just switch screens right off the bat here to my Google Chrome browser, and we'll show you a little taste of what you might expect with Lucidworks Fusion 3. And then we'll get into all the features and the whys and the hows, and then we'll finish up with yet another demo. And so what I'm going to do is switch over here. So I get out of my PowerPoint presentation. And one of the things that we've tried to accomplish with Fusion 3.0 is kind of building on top of course, all of the things that we've done in Fusion 1 and Fusion 2. And when I think about those things, I kind of put it in the context of Fusion 1 for all of us was all about capabilities. We know we had this really great engine in Solr at the core of Fusion that could answer a lot of really interesting questions. But we wanted to then build out on top of that. So in Fusion 2, we introduced things like Spark and other features. And so Fusion 2 in a lot of ways was about features. How do we start to bring together a number of different features that help our customers and our users solve problems in the search space? Finally then, Fusion 3 really is about building out on top of those capabilities and features and leading into things like workflows and a deeper, richer user experience that helps people build applications a lot faster and in a lot more robust way, and then deploy and support them at lower cost. So what I'm going to do here, just for this first little taste of a demo, is show you one of those workflows. I'm here at the Lucidworks admin console. And one of the things that you'll notice in 3.0 that's different from previous versions is we have this little new to Fusion quick start. And so I'm just going to walk through that quick start because one of the things we really wanted to address is the new developers coming into search, because one of the big trends in the search space over the past few years is a lot more usage by a lot more developers and application architects who maybe have never done search before. And so we wanted to help them get up with their data a lot faster. And so as you can see, this is a pretty straightforward workflow. I'm just going to walk through a few steps. First off, you can choose to create an existing collection, or what I'm going to do is create my own. Let's call it Quick Start. And I'm going to hit continue here. It's going to go off in the background, do all of the things in the back end of Solr and Spark, etc., that need to be done in order to support that collection. And if you want, we actually now ship with a couple of different data sources out of the back box. So like if you don't have a data source ready, or if you just want to do that kind of that 5-minute smell test of, hey, what's this Fusion 3 thing about, you can try out one of these data sources. Or what I've done actually is downloaded some data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And I'm going to use that throughout the remainder of my demos here to showcase some of the features and capabilities in Fusion 3. I put a link on the slides. I'll show you that again when we come back. What I'm going to go in here and choose File. And what I've got is a simple file of 10,000 rows that were sampled from one of the data archives up on that site around complaints that people have had about their automobiles. So it's pretty simple, straightforward CSV. It's got, I don't know, 20 or 30 different columns. We'll find out here in a minute. And so I'm going to upload those. And you can see right off the bat now I've got a set of search results going on that kind of let us explore what's going on in this data. And I can do things like, search for braking and other things. I can format that data. I can look at the different attributes of the data here. Like say I want to look at the cities that were involved in that data, or if I want to look at other attributes of it, like perhaps what state or whether there's fires involved or how many people were injured, etc. All of those things I can start to explore very quickly in my quick start here. Of course, that's all well and good, but then what I might want to do is start to see how some of that data breaks down. And so I'm going to hit the continue button here. And if you've been using Solr for a while, you're very familiar with faceting. If you're new to search, you might be wondering, well, what's this faceting thing about? Well, it's really a great way to start to explore your content. And so I can start to add facets around things like those cities or the state, perhaps, if I can type here, that all of these things happen, or whether there's injuries, whether there's injuries involved, et cetera. And so now you start to see how we can build out very quickly a very simple search UI that lets me explore this data. And if I hit the continue button here next, we then kind of finish off pretty quick and straightforward workflow, but hopefully you can see there's kind of a lot of power in that. You can just pretty much throw data at it. I happen to throw some CSV at it, but you could do JSON, you could do other types of data sources, and the system tries to just work off of it. And that's a lot of the principles behind Fusion 3.0 when it comes to user experiences. We should be very accepting of what people give us while then doing what we consider to be the best approach or a reasonable approach when it comes to knowing and understanding that data. And you'll start to see that woven throughout some of the other tools that we have in the admin side. And from that then, you can see on the final page here, we then lead you into all of the other things you can start to do, whether that's the index workbench or leveraging the query workbench or going to the documentation. Or hey, if you just want to try out some curl commands or leverage Postman or one of the tools for using REST, you can start doing that. I'm going to just finish up this quick little demo by clicking the Open Query Workbench. And you can see now we've got a little bit more robust view of what's going on with that data. Right? So you can see, in fact, that all of those things that I just did in the quick start now show up in the search page here. And you can see we offer tooltips for people getting started about things like stages and where to do searches and all of that kind of stuff. And if we want, we can drill in a little bit more and see that actual data in action underneath the hood. And so that's a quick start to our quick start. And so let me switch back now to our presentation, and we'll get into a bit more about the where and why and how of all of this. And there you can see, in case you want to just grab that real quick, and of course the slides and webinar will be available as well. There's the link to some of the documents that I just showed you. There's actually quite a number of really interesting data sets up on there, and we'll dig into those here as we go later. In terms of agenda, we already knocked off number one. How's that for a great start? Wanted to talk a little bit about our vision for search and Fusion, and then how that leads into what are the key features and functionality behind Fusion 3. And then we'll go into a bit deeper of a demo on those capabilities using that data set that we just started with. In terms of vision around search, I think one of the things that we just see repeatedly throughout it, a lot of customers and organizations, is that search tends to be broken in a lot of places, especially behind the enterprise. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But probably the main three, and the starting off, is really that, number one, users' expectations have changed around search. It's no longer good enough to be in your enterprise and put up a search box, point it at a bunch of content and say, hey, here's your little keyword box and here's your 10 blue links. Let's face reality here in that all of us in our day-to-day lives as consumers interact all the time with top-tier brands who do search right. And all of us then want that same experience back in the enterprise. And so that's reason number one. And kind of the reason why we want all of that is because in reality, when you're in a lot of these enterprises, the existing search systems simply don't perform. They don't scale. They don't account for what users do. They can't address all of the new types of data and all of the new types of questions that people want to ask, right? And in reality, I think the biggest reason why search is broken in a lot of enterprises is because a lot of enterprise applications, and search is no different here, the people implementing search have left out the user. They have forgotten how or why, or don't know how to track what users are doing, or they set up very elaborate, very complex systems for gathering data about what users are doing. For instance, it's very common in retail that all of the data about how users are interacting with the e-commerce site, with the product catalog, that's all captured over in marketing. Meanwhile, the search team is kind of over on the other side saying, hey, I really need this data in order to make for better search. But it's such a long and laborious process to get that data out of Omniture, get it cleaned up, processed, and then put back into the search engine where it can be leveraged. And so with Fusion, we really wanted to focus in on how can we solve those problems. And so with Fusion, I think we really set out to build a product that addresses those gaps in the market. And in many ways, it's founded on three key principles. The first principle behind Fusion is we wanted to make it easier for people to capture what users are doing with their data and get those next generation results that all of us are used to having on the web. And so for us, that starts with our signal capture framework. If you've been to any of our previous webinars, you know that we talk a lot about signals. They are very key to driving that next generation relevance, especially for your common queries or for the things that users find most relevant and most popular. I was just talking to a customer the other day who was seeing somewhere between a 10 and 15% uplift in the quality of their search results and interactions with their customers simply by churning on signals in Fusion. The old way, the baseline way, was they were doing all kinds of hand tuning with Solr. They started collecting that signal data, mining it out of their logs, feeding it into the Fusion signal engine, and then churned it on 10 to 15% uplift right off the bat. No other work involved. And of course, with Fusion, you can go a lot deeper than that. As you'll see in our architecture, there's a lot of capabilities underneath the hood in terms of machine learning, rules, experiment management that can help you get more out of your search experience than just out of the box, writing queries and futzing with your indexing. The second part, second pillar, if you will, of Fusion is we really wanted to simplify application development. When Eric Hatcher and myself and a few others started this company back in 2007, we started off, really focused on how do we help Solr users get the most out of Solr. Over that period of time, we've done a lot of consulting engagements. We've done a lot of work with a lot of different customers in a range of applications. And time again, we've seen opportunities where we can build into the product a much simpler application development environment, whether that's providing lots and lots of connectors for a variety of different data sources, or making it easier for customers to deploy pipelines, do ETL, understand what's going on in their content more effectively, or whether it's integrating in with the myriad of security systems out there in the enterprise, things like Kerberos and LDAP and Active Directory and single sign-on. We wanted to make those things simple configuration, point-and-click items, not hardcore programming projects, because frankly, I don't know about you, but as a developer, I don't necessarily like doing those things. I just want them to work, and I want them to be fast. Finally, and getting back to those roots of how and why we founded that company, we wanted to deliver best-in-class open source. And for us, that started off with Apache Solr and has evolved quite significantly to, of course, include Spark. We then backed that up with things like customer success programs, a large team of committers who do a lot of work on Solr, and really that's all things that help us deliver capabilities to you in terms of Fusion, but it also is what then lets our customers and our users attract and grow their teams, because they know they are building on top of capabilities that they can take with them throughout their career. As a reminder then, real quickly, putting up our Fusion architecture, and then we'll get into the Fusion 3.0 capabilities. On the right-hand side here, you see all of those open source bits, Spark, Solr, and Zookeeper. I kind of like to think about it this way. Solr is, of course, our query engine. It's our database. It's the thing that allows us to answer very sophisticated questions very quickly. Spark then is the offline, large-scale distributed compute engine that allows us to take and look at all of the data in the system and say, what can we learn from that data? How can we enrich it? How can we make it better such that we can overlay it on top of that query engine? Case in point, as I referenced earlier, is the things like those signals, where we take all of the clicks, all the add to carts, the checkouts, the shares, etc. We munge them together in Spark, and then we feed them right back into Solr such that at query time, we can ask questions not only of the core content, but also of the collaboration index as well. Last but not least, in the open source there is Zookeeper. Zookeeper is what I like to call the engine that gives your ops team their nights and weekends back. It's the thing that makes sure this stuff is all up and running. It makes sure it's coordinating services. It makes sure it knows where things are, who's happy, who's not happy, and does the right thing behind the scenes and pretty much just works. Moving to the left then, we build out our core services, things like our ETL pipelines, our recommenders, signals, NLP, machine learning capabilities, on and on and on. These are all value add on top of the open source that really are designed for one of two things. Like I said, either making your application development easier, faster, better, or they're about how do we ask more interesting questions of the data that's in Solr and Spark. For instance, things like the recommenders and machine learning, where we're learning patterns based off of how users interact. And then, of course, all the way to the left, standard modern architecture, REST APIs, all of that good stuff, security woven throughout, lots and lots of connectors, UI kits, et cetera, et cetera. So that's Fusion at a high level in a nutshell. I think you've seen a lot of great progression over the years in terms of what it has to offer. So let's then focus in on Fusion 3.0. And as you'll see, there's a number of really high-level things we're going to talk about. And of course, that doesn't do any justice to all the other low-level things that we try to do and bake in, just like anybody who's building out software in terms of bug fixes and performance improvements and all of those things. So one of the first things we really focused on with 3.0 is kind of how do we help people up the learning curve or the data curve faster? And one of the things we saw routinely from customers as they were engaging with us is they wanted help getting data into the system as fast and as efficiently as possible while understanding the subtleties that often go into parsing multi-structured content. Content that has, for instance, text and dates and spatial information and Booleans and enumerated types. And so out of that came the design for our index workbench, and there's a number of interesting things in this. We revamped our parsing framework. In previous versions, we had a couple of different places how we handled parsing content, whether that's PDF or Office files or JSON or CSV. We've kind of pulled that up and out and made it into what I call a first-class citizen. I'll show you a little bit of that in the demo later. Second part is we really focused on how do we help you see live what's going on with your data. And so things like making it easy to turn on and off or edit your pipeline changes and then seeing the data change right before your very eyes so that you can then react and make adjustments before you even save or commit to adding that content to the index. And I'll just say here too, I've seen the designs for 3.1 and beyond around this stuff, and we're only getting started with these, or we're just getting started with these capabilities. There's a lot of great things coming where we can leverage much deeper understanding of the data through this index workbench. And of course, during the demo, I will show you that. not to be left out on the query side. We don't want those queries to not receive the same love that the indexing side did. And so to complement the indexing side, we also added a query workbench. And again, kind of the same principle here. Customers were repeatedly asking us, how do we get a better sense of what effect our changes will have on our results? And so out of that came the query workbench. And as you can see here in the screen capture, the idea is that yet again here we've got our pipeline. As those requests come in, we can see what's happening, how certain pipeline stages affect the results. And then, of course, we can interact with the results. We can do searches. We can add facets. We can look at the content underneath the hood, just kind of like what I showed you at the beginning demo here. We can do things like apply relevancy rules. And again, we do this all in kind of a sandbox space such that you can try this stuff out before you publish it live. Next up in our list of features, of course, we talked a lot about the open source earlier on. We wanted to make sure we gave you the latest and greatest, or at least the near latest and greatest. So we've upgraded to Solr 6.3 and Spark 1.6.3. As you can see here, there's a number of highlights around what those capabilities bring to the table. Solr is on the left-hand side. Spark is on the right-hand side. A lot of interesting features, and again, one of the cool things about Fusion that I really love is you have full access to those things when you want it. You don't necessarily need to have it in all cases because Fusion will do a lot for you out of the box, but when you get to that really tricky problem and you need to get underneath the hood, Solr and Spark are there for you. Moving right along, of course, there's always lots of other things, and this is all kind of leading up to me demoing a number of these capabilities. Some of the bigger features here, we wanted to make it easier for people to move from dev to QA to staging to production, and so Fusion now supports full import and export of all of the objects that have been created in the Fusion UI, and you can then take and actually apply variable substitutions to those so that you can take that definition and check it into your version control, something like GitHub. Somebody else can come and check it out, bind their specific machine bindings to it, and have the exact same reproducible environment. Or when you go to staging or prod, you can, of course, bind to the staging and prod variables such that you have a seamless, consistent experience across all of your instances of Fusion. A number of other interesting things. As you'll see here in a little bit, I'm going to talk about some of the SQL capabilities we added. To go along with those, we've added a lot of tools geared towards the data scientist who often are working with things like Python or working with notebooks like Jupyter or Zeppelin or any of the other notebooks out there. So we now have support for things like PySpark, or as you see here on the right-hand side, Jupyter. Along the lines of those signals, we added support for our clickstream boosting right out of the box. You no longer have to set anything up for clickstreams. All you have to do is send us your clickstreams, and we will automatically start aggregating that data and applying it in the query pipelines by default. Of course, if you don't want better results, you can turn it off. Number 4 on there, obviously a lot of performance improvements underneath the hood here. A couple of quick highlights. We now have streaming document support, as well as better support for large or archival documents, things like zip files, tarballs, etc. All will perform much better in Fusion 3 than they have in the past because we've adopted a streaming architecture there. We've done a lot of work with a number of customers about getting our aggregation layer, that thing that's taking those signals underneath the hood, built on top of Spark, and making that a lot faster and more efficient by leveraging things like data locality and Spark performance improvements and all of that kind of stuff. I believe we've tested that out at hundreds of millions, if not billions, of events now. Very scalable, very fast. And so that's a lot of interesting capabilities for people who want to start to use Fusion for not just search but analytics. The third performance improvement that's really interesting is connectors can now load balance their output across a number of different index pipelines, so you can scale out performance of indexing even more than in the past. Last but not least, a couple of additional features and functionality on the query side. We've added in a default out-of-the-box content-based recommendation pipeline built on top of Solr's more like this capability. So if you want to start to show people automatically documents that relate to other documents, you can just hit that pipeline with a doc ID and it will get you back related items. That's an area where we're going to be expanding out on in 3.1 and beyond. So this is kind of laying the groundwork for next level of recommendation capabilities that will be coming in 3.1. Last but not least, we know we're not necessarily the only system in town. Data often lives in legacy systems or other search engines or other databases. And so one of the things we wanted to do is make it easier for people to leverage that data in Fusion. The name itself kind of implies we're fusing together lots of different things, so why not other systems? And so we added in the ability to do query time joins via what we call the query rest stage. This really enables us to call out to systems like Cassandra or Mongo and then interleave those results with the responses from Solr. In some cases, even you may just have that be the result back out, and so it gives you a single consistent interface across all of your data. Last but not least, something that we've done a lot of work on around helping people leverage Fusion for search-driven analytics. And one of the things we've consistently heard from our community is, boy, all of this search-driven analytics, the facets, the aggregations, the streaming expressions, those are all really good, but I've got a whole lot of users who don't know Solr, or they don't know Scala or Spark or even Python, but guess what? They know SQL, and I say they know SQL. They have knowledge of SQL, not know SQL. And so we wanted to take what we know about all of this engine and deliver a truly unique capability in the market around SQL. I've got a link here to the blog post where my colleague Tim Potter goes into a lot more details about this, but I want to delve into this a little bit more, and of course it's going to be a key part of our demo here as well. Some of the getting out of the box things, nothing truly unique here from others in the sense that we are connecting and using standards for making all of this engine available. We're obviously relying on Spark underneath the hood here. That allows you to do some really interesting things in terms of cross-data source joins, not just cross-collection as in collections within Solr, but truly cross-data source joins where you might be connecting to a Cassandra or an Elasticsearch or something else, a Mongo, and you want to then join that in with the data that's in Spark and in Solr and get results out and up to your users. Naturally, we wanted to make sure all of this stuff worked in standard ways, so ODBC, JDBC drivers. As you'll see here in a minute, tools like Tableau and Zeppelin and all of that can then leverage Fusion as a SQL source. And most importantly, we wanted to make sure we were really smart about how we did these things. And so we've done a lot of work to make sure that we push down questions to Solr where it makes sense, or that we do calculations in Spark where it makes sense. And so there's been a lot of work around intelligent query planning, if you will, saying, oh, hey, I don't want to move this data out of Solr. I can have Solr rank or rate or sort this data very fast, very efficiently, filter it down, and then feed it up into my Spark engine where I'm going to do more expensive iterative calculations. And so underneath all of that stuff is baked into the Spark Solr Fusion capabilities. So those are some of the basic features. Going above that, I think there's some truly unique things that we bring to the table. Obviously, you've got full Solr capabilities here, meaning that we can leverage Solr query syntax. We can do things like graph traversals for very complex relationships. We can leverage Solr's built-in machine learning capabilities. And if you think about any SQL engine out there, many of them have very rudimentary understanding of multi-structured content. I've been doing SQL for a long time, probably longer than I care to admit. But I used to do all these little simple things of like queries, where this column like that, or would do a lot of things around sorting by columns. And it was always very frustrating because I could never get exactly what I wanted out of this complex, rich data. And I think one of the things that truly excites me about this with Solr is I get to take advantage of all this fuzzy capabilities that Solr brings to the table. I can do very complex sorts, right? At the end of the day, this is what a search engine is geared towards, is doing very fast, very complex sorts that take into account things like text and spatial data and numerical data, and then rank them such that I know at the end of the day when these rows and columns come back to me, I know the top of that list is the most important data. And that truly is a game changer when you start to think about understanding data in the big data environment. You want the engine to rank the data for you. Otherwise, you have to sift through it all yourself. Second big thing here, of course, with Solr, and thus through Fusion, you get first-class support for text and numerical data and spatial, and of course you can add in your own custom data types. Last but not least, one of the key underpinnings to all of this Fusion SQL stuff is what we call the Fusion catalog. And this makes it really easy for the administrators of this system to do things like create views or enforce data governance or build standard reports for their customers or for their users, so that they can get better performance and you can have total accountability over all of the assets in your data. And so that Fusion catalog has APIs underneath the hood, and it's something the engine itself leverages all the time to make sure things like schemas are appropriate and security is appropriate and performance is at the top of what it can be. With that then, we then wanted to make sure that we could leverage all of the visualization and reporting engines out there. And really that's kind of the last key piece to why we went and built this SQL engine into Fusion, is we wanted to be able to leverage things like Tableau or Zeppelin or Jupyter, et cetera, where people are doing some very interesting data science, where they're generating images, they're generating reports, telling stories, and all of those good things, right? And it's one thing to have rows and columns of data. It's another thing to be able to tell a story with that data by drawing pictures and overlaying content and context on top of it for a much richer experience. So those are some of the highlights of Fusion 3. What I'm going to do now is dig in and show you this under the hood in a bit more depth. So let me switch back to Chrome, and let's get started. As always, live demos are always really fun, so I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to go to my DevOps tab, and I'm just going to make sure that I've got a clean system happening here. You can see there I've got a default collection and a quick start. One of the things I've mentioned is that we have the ability to do import and export. What I've done then in true demo cooking channel fashion is I've created export offline, and I'm going to now load up that export here by selecting my data file. It's right here called Fusion Setup JSON. As the name implies, it's just a simple JSON file that has all of the configuration for my collections, my pipelines, my data sources, etc. This is something that I could email out to you if you wanted to see the looks of it, the likes of it, or you could share with your colleagues and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to hit open. I'm going to hit import. One of the things we do right off the bat is detect where there are problems. I have a running system up and going already, so you can see, for instance, there's some conflicts, and then you have a choice as to how you want to deal with those. I'm going to hit the overwrite button. Fusion's going to go off and start importing all of these things, and demo God's willing, it will all work out here in a couple of seconds. While it's doing that, we'll start to think about what kind of data we want to bring in. I've got a number of different data sets. The part of this import, there are two key collections that I'm creating. The first one is called the complaints database. That's the one I showed you earlier that had the, the recall, or not the recall information, but had things like, braking systems failed and all of that. The other one was this recalls database, which essentially says, given the make, manufacturer, make, model, etc., here's what has been recalled and in what year, what date, and all of that kind of stuff. So let's dig in a little bit and start to look at the underpinnings of this. I'm going to select the NHTSA complaints index. And I've got a few screens open here in my palette, or on my canvas, as we like to call it here internally. And the main one I have open here is the index workbench. And in that, I've got a data source already set up. In this case, it is, the first case I showed you, I had 10,000 records. This one now has 250,000 records. You can see I've got things like my parser already configured. I'm using the default one. This is where we deal with whether the data is CSV or JSON or archived. And of course, you can go in and make changes as to how CSV files, for instance, are handled, or how rich Office documents are handled with Tika, so on and so forth. And then last but not least, I've got my pipeline stage. This is kind of like the downstream transformer from that data. So you can think about it, the data source is the extract, and then the parsing and the pipeline, those are the transformation stages ending with this index into Solr piece. And so you can see here I've done a little bit of field mapping. I've mapped a few of the document headers into various other ones, and you can see over here on the right then what the results are. So for instance, right here you can see there's a make txt and a make field. If I just simply turn off this field mapping, you can see now that I only have that make txt because I'm just relying on the default out-of-the-box parsing that's going on. Now, the Fusion import export works with all of the Fusion objects. I need to do one more thing. I need to upload a schema. I could go into the Fields Manager here and create my schema. So one of the things you can do here is have the data side by side with your Field Manager and do things like design a schema. So for instance, if I wanted to say that the death field, that's a happy thought, was an integer type because, looking at the data here, I can see that, across 5 or 6, a handful of documents, that field is an integer. All right, looks like it's an integer there. Looks like it's an integer in this third document. I might then say in my Fields Manager, that's an integer, and oh, by the way, I want it to be doc values, so I would click the button here, and now I would have that field created. Instead of doing that right at the moment, what I'm going to do is just upload a schema that I have created. That way my clumsy fingers won't mistype something and the demo will work. So I'm going to go into the Solr config manager here. I'm going to select our schema. As you can see, we give you even that low-level access to Solr configuration if you want it, right? And I think that's one of the things I really love about the capabilities here. And so I'm just going to switch off screen here, and I'm going to copy and paste in my proper schema. I'm going to hit save. And now that's saved. And then I'm going to come back over to my collection here, and I'm going to hit save first so that, of course, the results are saved. And now I'm going to start my indexing process. While that's running, let's shift gears a little bit and go to that other collection, the recalls database. And we're going to do some similar things here. I'm not going to spend as much time on the workflow or the workbench. I'm going to hit the search button. Just like in that other data set, I've got another data source already configured. I've got parsers, and I've got a very similar pipeline going on here. If you've seen previous webinars, you know that we, of course, can add in other stages. We've done also, one of the other things we've done in Trio is just make it, organize those stages a little bit more easily so that you can very quickly get at what kinds of things you're trying to do. Likewise with this data set, I do want a schema here as well. So I'm going to come in and do that exact same cooking channel demo and bring in my schema here. And I'm going to paste that in. And I'm going to hit save. And one of the cool things when I hit save is we actually publish that schema across the entire collection. So you don't have to go down underneath the hood in Solr and do your ZK operations. We've abstracted all of that stuff for you. I'm going to hit save on my data source here again, and just like I did with the previous one, I'm going to start that job as well. Okay, so I've spent a little bit of time showing you the indexing workbench. You know, you can do things like drill in on results. You can see how, you know, different things are affecting different results. You can apply your stages, all of that kind of stuff. So with that, let's actually go back and start to look a little bit more deeply at the query workbench. So, whoops, I'm going to click on the complaints database again. And as you can see, I've still got my workbench open. That should be still running. I'm going to just slide over here to the right a little bit, and I'm going to open up our query workbench. And you can now see I've got search results going on. And I can start to get a better sense of what's in this data. You can see I've got things like, oh, that looks like complaint description. I've got some dates. I've got some attributes, fire, etc. One of the things I like about this IDE style environment is I can kind of go back and forth between that indexing and querying and see the results side by side and make changes on the fly and say, oh, you know, I want fire to not be multi-valued, add that in as schema, etc. Just like you can on the query side, we can also do things on the query, or just like you can on the indexing side, we can do things on the query side, like decide what fields we want to search against or what facets we want to add. In this case, let's reproduce what we did in the quick start by adding in city and state. And now I've got my facets. Hit apply. And again, just as a reminder, when you're doing everything in this workbench environment, it's all being done in a sandbox. If this was on the live production system right now, the user would not notice any change at all. And so this gives you an ability to play with the data without affecting anybody else. It's not till you hit save that information is going to be published out to the end user, right? So this query workbench, again, very fast, very efficient way of building applications. You can see if I want to turn off those facets, I just uncheck the little circle there, and I've got my facets turned off. And of course, you can do other things in here, like simulate clicks. You can see how clicks would be affecting these results. You can do things like boosting and blocking. You can set up landing pages. You can essentially overlay editorial needs on top of your search results. You can, of course, do searches. You can decide you want to lay out your content in different ways. For instance, if we wanted the manufacturer to be first, we could do that as well, and you see those results right away. And of course, if I want to save those, I can do that as well. So that's kind of the high-level overview of the indexing workbench and the query workbench. You also saw a taste of the import-export capability. You saw how quick and easy it is to get data up and running. So let's spend a little bit more time on that SQL engine. And the way I'm going to do that is first by leveraging a notebook called Apache Zeppelin. This is open source, primarily works by connecting to Spark, and then leveraging all of Spark's capabilities underneath the hood. And so in this notebook, I've got a number of different notes, or paragraphs as they call them, that show what this data looks like. So for instance, I can come in here and I can run this show tables query, and it will show me as output, here's what's going on. These are all of the collections I have in my index, or in Fusion, sorry. I can come down here, I can run this one. I'm just going to show you the output. So you can see very simple SQL statements like select VIN from complaints and various other attributes. So you can see this VIN was a Ford Mercury Cougar, and if you wanted to dig deeper into that data, we of course could add various other attributes. I've got some describe capabilities down here, so if you want to see what's in specific tables, lo and behold, these things all line up with what's in the Solr schema, but we do some transformations for things like big int. If you're not familiar with Solr schema or Spark, we take care of mapping schema from Solr into Spark SQL. All of that stuff is handled seamlessly for you underneath the hood, and of course you can go and draw pretty pictures off of it, leveraging Zeppelin's built-in visualization capabilities. All that's well and good. Where it starts to get more interesting is that you can do much more complex type queries. So for instance, if you recall, no pun intended, I have two collections. One is the complaints collection and one is the recall collection. So this query right here, I know that's a little bit small, I'll highlight it. It says, let me select information from the complaints and do inner join with the recalls, and I'm using the make, model, and year as the join key. And so effectively what this query is saying is select VIN, state, city. It's saying show me all of the VINs that are affected by recall, like all of the makes and models that show up in the recall database. Find then the VINs that are affected by those recalls. And if I expand this little tab here, you can see those results. So for instance, I don't know if anybody, maybe the owner of this BMW is on the call. They should go get their airbags checked out because there's a problem with the battery safety terminal. All right, that person's in Los Angeles and they're driving in the M3. All right. We can go down. This one's a little bit harder to read because the Zeppelin has a little bit of a bug around how it's parsing the Solr syntax, but the last example I'll show you here in Zeppelin is actually leveraging some of that ranking and capabilities that Solr has underneath the hood that Fusion leverages. And so this is a similar query where I've actually gone and done a deeper, richer query. In this particular case, it's searching the recalls database again, and it's looking at the defect that's being reported or the consequence of it, and it's actually issuing a Solr phrase query against that column. Now, this is something that's very hard to do in SQL with your simple little like queries, and even with some of the search engine capabilities that the databases have been adding on, you'd be hard pressed to match the complexity and capabilities that the Solr SQL query parsing engine can bring to the table. This is one example of that. This supports full Solr syntax. You can do all kinds of tricks that you do in Solr here. This is a very simple one, just saying find me all occurrences of the word battery and ignite within 4 positions of each other. I know it's a little bit hard to read there, but that is the number 4, and it's a tilde, which means it's a phrase, a sloppy phrase query, as we like to call them in Solr. And so here are the results then. I've got, whoops, I've hit the wrong button. So let me just get back down to where I was. It's always fun scrolling in these tools. You can see here then, as I scroll to the left, I've got things like what was the consequence. You can see there's the word battery, and lo and behold, there's the word ignite. And if I go to the right here, you can see you get things like make and model and year and all of that kind of stuff. So that's great. We've got Zeppelin now. This is a great place to go try out your queries. But, at the end of the day, we often want to make pretty pictures out of that. So let's shift gears to Tableau. And what I've got set up here is Tableau Desktop Pro. At least I thought I did. There it is. And what I've done is gone off and created a connection to Tableau. So for people who are used to using Tableau, I'm using the Desktop Pro. This all works with the public free version as well. You do need what's called the Web Data Connector for that. That's freely available. I'll give you a link to that at the end of the webinar. In my case, I'm connecting to the Spark SQL engine. I did that by hitting the Add button, by choosing Spark SQL, and then filling out the necessary credentials. We have all of this stuff documented, and then I've gone in and chosen my schema, and I've loaded up all of the tables. I can load up all the tables that are there. And then I've already done this. I've dragged and dropped the complaints collection. So you can see now that that thing that was a collection in Solr parlance is now a table in Tableau speak. And right off the bat now, Tableau gives me a view of what all of that data looks like. Now, in my particular case here, just for the purposes of demo, I'm using an extraction of that data. I'm not doing the live. This is all local on my laptop. The performance is just a little bit less on my laptop than I want for demo purposes. So I'm leveraging an extract. That's also a convenient way to share samples of your data with other users in Tableau. You can create an extract. You can ship it off to your friend. You can say, hey, take a look at this, and here's my worksheet and all of that kind of stuff. So all that's well and good. I've got my data in. You can see it knows a lot of things about the data, like, hey, this is geographical information, this is text, so on and so forth. Let's then look at an actual sheet, as they call it in Tableau, where we can start to analyze this data. Now this particular one, as you can see, is just a visualization of injuries by manufacturer, make, and model. I hope your car is low on the list here. And all I did was start dragging and dropping things like manufacturer, make, model, etc. onto the list, and then essentially did a facet on the injured attribute, and voila, down here you've got, your Tableau list of all of the columns. I then went into the analytics side and I said, draw me average line. I dropped that on the table here, and voila, you can see now the average number of injuries in this data set is 24. Keep in mind that because I'm using an extraction, I'm not using the full data set. So all the numbers you see throughout all these sheets are based off of a sampling of the data, not the full data set. Of course, with Tableau, you can do either one. So that's the interesting one. It's probably a good start, good warm-up. Another thing we can do is pop over to the sheet here where I built out a tree map where we start to visualize complaints by state and model. So obviously a lot of pretty colors on the screen here. Upper left, as you might expect, just based off of the size and number of people in the state, California is at the top, and the Ford Explorer has 510 entries in this complaints index. Number 2 is I think that's the Chevy Suburban. and so on down the chain. And so we could start to look around and play with this data. You can apply things like filters. You can have the data page through it. You can, if you want, you can change the colors, etc. I'm not here to give you a full Tableau demo. They have a lot of great material up on their website if you want to explore that. Last but not least, visualization. One of the questions you might want to ask is, which model has the most complaints per state? And that's also a pretty easy thing to do. Drew a pretty quick picture here. One of the things you can do is you just drag and drop the state on there. That gets the state information going. And then I'm just counting by the number of records. And there is one little trick that you have to do in Tableau. This was an interesting one because this is something that's very easy, very straightforward with pivot faceting. With Tableau, it took a little bit of work to get to combining together the state and model and then doing a sort on it. But the result then is what you see here, where again, kind of like in that tree map, you can see that the top record is the Ford Explorer, and it's overlaid on what's called a filled map. So that's the Tableau side of the equation. And then really that ends the demo, and I think I've got a couple of minutes left, so let me just pop back over to my presentation where I'll give you some links and some pointers, and I think we've got a few minutes for questions. So as you can see there, while Aaliyah's loading up the questions, you've got links where you can download Fusion. You, of course, can get Tableau from Tableau. You can get Zeppelin from Apache. If you want to get a hold of us, there's information there. There's some links to things like our web data connector for Tableau. There's some links to Tim Potter's SQL blog post. And as always with our webinars, we do record them. And if you want to get a copy of that, or something to share with your colleagues, come back to the lucidworks.com website, and there will be a link there. So with that, I thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the Fusion 3 overview. We will have a number of webinars over the next couple of weeks that get into deeper and deeper details around Fusion 3. I encourage you to stay tuned and learn more. With that, Aaliyah.
Thanks, Grant. So we do have just a couple minutes for questions. Again, if we don't have time for your questions today, please expect a member of the Lucidworks team to get in touch with you. So the first question, Grant, that we have for you is it easy to install and use Fusion 3 over an existing Fusion 2 install? Is it easy to transfer our existing data and pipelines over?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things, of course, in ease of use and user experience is making sure that we can upgrade. And so we do have upgrade scripts available from Fusion 2 to Fusion 3. And in fact, part of that import-export going forward from Fusion 3 on is geared around making that process even easier. So while I think it's easy, obviously we are also here to help. We know there's some complex systems out there, search systems, applications. So if you do have any trouble, please feel free to reach out, and we are happy to help you migrate.
Thank you. The next question is, can you index Hadoop, RDBMS, Excel, CSV, and PDF files? If so, once these files are indexed, can you search across different file types?
Yeah, another great question. This is the quote-unquote data lake scenario. You've got Hadoop and HDFS set up, and you're essentially throwing all of your content into Hadoop and HDFS. This is one of our main use cases. We have connectors out of the box for all of the Hadoop flavors, if you will. Hortonworks, Cloudera, MapR, Apache, Default. So yes, we definitely can search and index all of those different, against those different repositories, as well as a wide variety of data types, CSV, Excel, JSON, PDF, Office documents, so on and so forth. All of those things are supported out of the box. And that's really where that index workbench starts to shine, because you can try out all of those things and see what the results look like before you commit to actually indexing them into Solr.
Thank you. So this will be our last question. Can you easily integrate the search view with facets, etc., into a website? Is the search interface usable in production?
Yeah, so the query workbench that I showed you is part of our admin console, and that's really geared towards the owners of the data and kind of the search developers and behind the scenes. If you recall my architecture slide earlier on, we do ship with a open source product built on top of Fusion called Lucidworks View that is designed to be either an out-of-the-box configure and away it goes application, or a getting started application in the sense that I want to go and develop my own. And so you can customize that. It's built on Angular and all of the kind of modern JavaScript principles. It really kind of depends. You know, a lot of our e-commerce and consumer-facing customers are, of course, integrating their site with our backend. In the internal enterprise, you know, more and more of them are using, you know, kind of the canned view, if you will, to get a quick start on the application. At the end of the day, Fusion publishes REST APIs, and so any language that can talk over HTTP to REST can interact and get data in and out of Fusion.
Thanks, Grant. So that concludes our session. Everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive a link to the recording and slides shortly. Again, if we didn't have time to answer your questions, look out for a note from someone on the Lucidworks team. If you have any outstanding questions, feel free to email events@lucidworks.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.